Hi everyone, some gamer dude here. Today I am reviewing a card game called Tenshoku. Tenshoku comes to us from Jeff Finnigan, the old Force of Will global liaison, and is essentially his take on Force of Will. It's also an unlicensed expansion / reboot of Force of Will that uses his own house rules, what I dubbed the Jeff format. Tenshoku can be played with or without your established Force of Will collection, and for this reason I won't be going over the gameplay. Check out my review for Force of Will and my video on the Jeff format to learn more. The sole remaining mechanical difference between Force of Will and Tenshoku is the Legend deck. Rulers are single-sided and have a 3-card extra deck called the Legend deck. The Legend feels like a hybrid of multiple extra deck concepts and the J-Ruler. Like the J-Ruler, you pay the cost and place it into play. When it dies, it is returned to the Legend deck face up, like how the G-Unit from Vanguard is placed back into the G-Zone at the end of the turn. This does mean you can summon a Legend 3 times and still have access to your Ruler, unlike the norm where you lose your Ruler on Judgment, and unless your J-Ruler has Imperishable, you lose it after just once, but it all kind of works out. Hi everyone, Future SGD here. So, I made a rather big mistake in my playtesting of Tenshoku. I played the Legends as if they were rulers. They do not function this way. Their cost isn't void, it's Legend counters. I didn't know this till 4 days before this video was meant to go live, over a week after it had been uploaded, and only noticed it by chance. I'll come back to this later in the video. Coming back around to this later, but it was the final bit of information necessary to play the game. Before starting to actually talk about Tenshoku, it is necessary for me to establish something. I consider Jeff a friend. This might lead some to believe that I'll be overly positive, or brush over the negatives due to that familiarity with the designer. But no. Not only has he requested that I be hard on the game, I find this mentality to be unethical. I couldn't in good conscience do that. It did make today's video very hard to make, as I wanted to be firm but fair, while also taking into consideration his feelings. This isn't a faceless corporation we're talking about, it's one man. Speaking from his position, harsh criticism can be cutting, so I'll try to be constructive in every criticism I make. I want to start by talking about the frame because it's the first thing you'll look at. For the most part, I quite like the frame. It incorporates a lot of the better aspects of Force of Will's second frame. I think the gold border is maybe a little too big. The name bar looks a tad slapped on because of it, especially with the transparency of the name bar, but it's not the thing that bugs me from an aesthetic standpoint. The green bar below the name is a secondary type bar. For rulers, it says ruler. Legends say legend, and then for everything else, it lists the card's archetype. I rather like the idea of having the archetype being part of the card type. I think that's rather ingenious. It allows you to refrain from having everything with the archetype in its name and saves space in the text box. Instead of a card with archetype in its name, you can shorten that to an archetype card. 4 words saving for space. As a person making a game, word space means a lot. What I don't like is the big green bar. It's garish, the green looks out of place for a game that already uses green as a colour, and it makes the frame look cluttered. For the life of me, I don't understand why Jeff didn't put the archetype in the type bar. It's not like there isn't space for it, and the legends already have redundancy there. They are legends in both type bars. I think putting the archetype in the type bar would have helped with the presentation. I think maybe the hexagon cost system could have been a little bit smaller, but it's not an issue. I again think it looks a little bit cluttered, but I don't think it's as obtrusive as the type bar. It's fine. I have seen photos of the actual cards. They are perfectly legible. But I need to comment on the legibility of the images online, both on the Tenshoku website and Untap. They are exceptionally hard to read. It's a combination of being downscaled when made into a JPEG, the thin black text on a transparent black background, and a very small white stroke. But I actually had genuine trouble reading these cards until I brought them up to double normal size on the computer. As I said, it doesn't affect the real cards if you wish to procure those. The images do not reflect the actual product, but it is a pain while playing it on Untap and concerning when you look at those images. Moving on to gameplay, Tenshoku brings to the table some new keywords, and I really like some of them. I think the standout is Divine Blade. When a resonator is destroyed by the damage of a resonator with Divine Blade, it is removed from the game. I've never seen that keyworded before. I think it's cool, and it fits nicely into a combat theme. It's also open-ended, so it goes with a fight mechanic. It doesn't stipulate battle, just damage. Dash is a new take on swiftness. The L Resonator can attack L Resonators or use activate effects on the turn it's summoned, but it can't attack players. I think that's a good way of keeping things in check versus letting them smash face. Shatter is essentially a damage trigger effect for mill. If the card is milled, use the shatter effect. I think I could use an icon to make it more obvious the card has shatter, but it's fine. While it does lean hard into dredge, I think it's a bit more reasonable. Last Will is a death trigger effect. When it's sent to the grave from the field, use the effect. This is a lift of last words from the Caster Chronicles. I think the reason Divine Blade stands out so much more is because it feels proactive and plays into the game engine's aggressive nature. It's a battle keyword. I think that helps Dash stand out a bit more too. Tenshoku also brings back Chance Standby, now renamed Stratagem, along with Stealth. There is also a massive reduction in the frequency of Quick Cast, to the point where it's more likely found on Resonators than it is Chance. This means that in some respects, Stratagem takes the place of the Chance Instant. Something I really have to give Tenshoku is that the Chance Standby here, the Stratagem, feel far better designed than Force of Wills. Until we got cards like Flame Trap, most Chance Standby were annoying to get set off and didn't really feel worth it in the long run. Here they're much more like Flame Trap. The scenario they call for happens pretty normally, and they either act as a trap, like Flame Trap, a genuine repercussion for an action, or are a big body to block with. The execution is head and shoulders above Force of Will, and I wish Force of Wills were originally like this. They were largely hard to set off and unremarkable until the end of their tenure. I appreciated the Stratagem more than I ever did Chance Standby. I'm personally not big on colourless cards for most games. I think they're more trouble than they're worth and result in all sorts of problems. But I don't hate what Jeff did with Tenshoku, taking inspiration from Yu-Gi-Oh! And its staple cards. Your Monster Reborns, Raigekis, Mystical Space Typhoons, and whatnot. Void has become the staple colour. It's now just generic things all decks might like for whatever reason. Control, handcrafting, very general effects. I was pleasantly surprised that most felt tame and didn't feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! Staples at all. Far weaker and only fit into specific niches. I came around to this decision. Still not something I like. I think colourless cards somewhat defeat the purpose of the colour pie, but I thought the execution was well done. This is unfortunately where what I liked about Tenshoku ended. The games ended when both players had 4 magic stones pretty frequently, making Tenshoku just 1 turn longer on average than current Force of Will. I was hoping for a more satisfying tit-for-tat, get to the back end of the magic stone deck. No, not the case. This is why I said Legends being at 3 wasn't an issue. We never summoned them. Hi, Future SGD here again. On the Legends, in retrospect, I should have put 2 and 2 together, that these names were connected, but in my defense, I was told, use Force of Will's rules, and I chose to take that entirely literally. To me, it was a straight statement without ambiguity. Tenshoku, due to the volume of text on the cards, something I discuss in this video, does not use reminder text. The cards simply do not have the space for it. None of the legends say, summon this card by using legend counters, or anything of the sort. To me, the grey hexagons looked like a stylized version of the Void cost. When I was checking how the new keywords work, because it's on the advanced page, I overlooked the description for Legend. Again, I went by what I was told. Play it like Force of Will. So going through the basic page, I'd skim past the Legend looking for the new keywords, finding myself on the advanced page. Now, if you want to say this is a negative against Tenshoku, I think you'd be right. Reminder text is important, and especially so with new concepts. I didn't bring it up in this video because I felt I was hard enough on the game already, and I understood with the volume of text on the cards. You literally couldn't without purposely making cards for reminder text or making the cards weaker than they are. I do think the website is very useful, but I think it'd do Jeff well to have a cheat sheet, a document that he can include in packages or give to potential players online that he can say, here, this is what you need to know coming from Force of Will. This document would list deck building rules, how legends work, and the new keywords. Tenshoku has enough deviances from Force of Will for the statement, play it like Force of Will, to lead people down the wrong path. Sorry for this again, on with the video. It's not really that different to Force of Will in terms of game length, not in a meaningful way anyway. But when cards have so much text that in some cases they are literally bursting from the seams, maybe it was to be expected. Many of these cards with massive amounts of text are doing too much. We're talking about cards with 4 effects, or multiple lengthy effects. I think it would have been wise to split many of these cards in 2, then empower both effects or reduce the cost of both cards. It is quite literally the exact same problem Force of Will currently has. A card is doing too much because it's multiple cards crammed into one. Take Tau as an example. It's an addition-based deck, and their additions have the effect that Tau Resonators gain +100/+100 on top of whatever else they do. Would it not have made more sense to put that on the ruler? Remove the text from all the additions, give the ruler your Tau Resonators gain +100/+100 for each Tau addition you control. That probably would have helped the rulers have more identity too. I don't like the rulers for the most part. The rulers revolve around a mechanic called the legend counter. When you do a thing, they get a legend counter, and then you can spend the legend counters to do something else. Sounds alright on face value, but I think they could have been so much better. Take again the Tau Empress, Tau Val. She can rest 2 additions to draw a card, then pitch a card and gain a legend counter. A couple of Tau cards have effects triggered when you pitch a card, so synergy is there. Not terribly different to Violet from Saga 3 actually. Then she banishes an addition you control to take or give a counter to a ruler. Okay, sure. Then finally she can use 5 legend counters to search for a 6 cost or less resonator and plop it onto the field. I'll be really honest, only one of those effects, the first one, feels like part of the deck because of those cards whose effects are triggered when you discard cards. Not that the search doesn't have its uses, it's just ungodly slow, even with the second effect, and what it's trying to do isn't very practical. If she had the +100/+100 effect of the Tau additions instead of a ladder to effects, I think her identity would have been clearer. Water's Nameless one is by far the worst though. I don't think she really even does anything. When you draw a card outside of your draw phase, she gets a legend counter. Then you spend 5 to search your opponent's deck for a card and remove it. The deck is a mill deck, but it feels like so much of nothing. I felt like I didn't even have a ruler. I think the standouts were Nero, Fagendari, or Fahendari, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, and Tau Val, the Void, Dark, and Fire rulers respectively. Nero gets legend counters when you use a Fabled card, then can spend those legend counters to draw cards, pay Void costs, or pay for Divine cards. I think there is a nice central theme of making the Void cards better. Fagendari is a take on Seer of the Blue Moon, and considering Dark is the stealth colour, it works as a central identity. Tau Empress Tau Val comes very, very close, enough to mention. Her draw pitch facilitates a lot of other cards and an alternate win con and fire I found. The archetypes themselves are a victim of the cards doing too much. The archetypes have multiple identities and as a consequence, the decks feel unfocused. Is Light Lords the remove from game theme? It has a heavy focus on Divine Blade combat and Light Lord Battlefield supports this. But no. The ruler only interacts with Mill, and it's actually the self-mill resurrection theme, heavy shadow focus. Why the archetype then? There is two clear unrelated themes. Same goes for Tau. Is it the addition theme, or is it the pitch theme? Yes! So why the archetype? Blue's Phantom has elements of both mill to win and self-mill. The self-mill stuff works with Light Lord's Shadow Focus. So I ask again, why the archetype? There isn't a real point beyond locking search to specific things. While I still love the idea of archetypes being a super type, it should have been the traditional system if implemented at all. Archetype in the name only interact with that name. A push to a series of cards, not full archetypes. The result here feels like the original Rezard expanded to the entire game, and the original Rezard was not a coherent design. In all reality, you should be mixing the archetypes to make a coherent deck based on mechanical themes. But again, I'm circling back to the why archetypes question. It's not like Force of Will hasn't had themes spread among multiple colours. If the archetypes had been multicoloured, and the other colours were part of the functional archetype, this wouldn't be an issue. More on that at the end. Something that irked me a lot was how Tenshoku mentions Force of Will concepts that it itself doesn't use just to hose them. This is even worse when those cards are rulers. So you sit down, turn over your ruler, and if your opponent is playing with those Force of Will cards, they essentially get blanked. The cards themselves feel bitter because of it and exude that energy. I get that Tenshoku may come from a place of resentment and frustration, but I wish it found positivity in its development and became its own thing. It would be so much stronger as its own game, casting away Force of Will completely, acting as a spiritual successor rather than an expansion. That is kind of my main gripe with the beta set of Tenshoku. It can't come out of the shadow of Force of Will, both in terms of power level and the emotions the cards emit. Many of the cards feel sterile, like they were made for functionality first and fun last. Nothing feels like that big draw play or that big draw card. There's nothing beyond raw gameplay to gain interest. This isn't to say that Tenshoku is a horrible game with massive issues. It's really not. I think there is some enjoyment to be had there. I'd be lying to say I didn't enjoy some of my experiences with it. It's just that I don't really care for the design style of beta. When you give me an avatar or an archetype, I expect that cohesive design. I expect the archetype to be self-contained, not pulled in two different directions. I expect the avatar to have an identity with a central core of cards, or be a build-around. This is a conflict in design ethos. Talking to Jeff, I know he likes cards to be far more open than I do, but again, I'll circle back to why archetypes. I think Force of Will, for all its problems, does have stronger card design in its current form. It has a central card or group of cards, then builds from there. To go back to my Tau Violet comparison, I like Violet's design. Once per turn hand filter, use cards specific to her, and you essentially get madness off of it. Then the rest of the deck interacts with those specific cards, either bringing them back to the hand, counting them, or removing them from the game. There is a very clear and precise theme. Tau has some cards that do things if they are on board when you discard cards. It's a very different design. Ideally, it's a burn deck with Tau City Demon, Kenpachi, and Lonely Dragoon Knight, or more realistically, Tau City Demon and Cycle of Fate. When you discard a card, Demon burns your opponent by 300. Kenpachi draws you a card each time you discard a card, and Lonely Dragoon Knight discards your hand for 400 damage to target player or resonator for each card discarded. Alternatively, Cycle of Fate discards your hand, then draws you that much +1. Demon Cycle takes a couple of uses to win and a lot of luck. Demon Kenpachi Dragoon takes much longer, and you will likely have to ramp into Talval's 5 legend counter effect, which probably isn't practical. Chances are you are better off just going Raw Edition across the board. Just a little tangent here, because I'm proud of this, but I did find an alternate win condition in the game with some of the cards I just mentioned. Keep up a decent hand till turn 4, get Tau City Demon and Kenpachi into play. Use Talval's Allure to draw 3 cards due to Kenpachi, then Allure to further +1. Tau Empress draws 1, then discards 1, you draw another from Kenpachi, end with 8+ cards in hand. Kenpachi is too openly worded, so when you discard down to 7, you just win. Every time you discard, you draw 1. Every time you discard, you deal 300 damage to your opponents. The game keeps checking your hand size to discard. 14 cards for lethal, perfectly doable. Jeff was impressed that this happened. It's far from hard, but this is something I keep an eye on with my own work. If I made Kenpachi, it'd say effect or costs, as to not leave it open for this abuse. I've come across this type of thing before in other games, so I stay mindful of it. Back to my Tau Violet comparison, I don't believe there really is a comparison. Violet is a much better constructed set of cards. I'll be brutally honest. While there are some things I can really appreciate, I think some of the decks can be a lot of fun. Tau certainly is, and there are sparks of fun in the other decks. I don't think I liked Beta when taken as a whole. It conflicts with my design sensibilities and what I expect with the design decisions made. I can't get past the negative tone regarding Force of Will, and I don't think it really achieves what it sets out to do. Current Force of Will expresses the concept of rulers far better than any time prior, and older Force of Will was just more enjoyable. If Tenshoku had just been the beta set, I'd make a very strong argument for what I said earlier. It should have been a spiritual successor. Tone down the stat levels, tone down the power levels, recraft more components of the game, true fresh start. I still think that's a worthwhile venture, but as you may be able to tell from the words I started using, there is a second set. Gamma. Gamma is the saving grace of Tenshoku as far as I am concerned. I haven't played it yet. It still does some things I roll my eyes at. I'll get to that, but overall a lot of my complaints are addressed. All references to Force of Will mechanics not used by Tenshoku are gone, and with it the overall negative resentful tone. Archetypes are now multicolour and feel more cohesive, like archetypes. You don't see random cards with shatter because you might be running Light Lords or Phantoms or fighting Phantoms or whatever. The archetype is completely self-referential. Rulers for the most part feel like they're more integral parts of their decks, like they actually do something, like the deck is one with the ruler. Many cards are still doing way too much. Obscurus gets into absolutely ridiculous territory, but overall I think the card design is much stronger than Beta. It really is like night and day. It does venture into pre-built decks with a bunch of text territory, but given the archetypes and frankly how a lot of Avatar-type games can function, it's for the best. Tenshoku's Gamma set as a whole feels more positive, much better crafted, and like it better understands what it needs to be. Again, I need to play it, but comparing the cards to my experiences with Beta, I'd say Gamma looks like the real start, the alpha, and Gamma is more of a test build. Before I sat down to read the Gamma cards, I was going to compare Tenshoku to other games. More correctly, this would be comparing Beta to other games. I think it's about on par with the Caster Chronicles. It's rough, needs some fixing. I thought it was more salvageable than Casters, but I think Casters has more original appeal in its mechanics and themes. I like Gate Ruler more than both of them, Japanese release warts and all. Then there's Gamma. Gamma seems to improve so much over Beta, an improvement that Casters never had, and Force of Will took years to achieve. I believe it puts it above Casters. I think it starts either inching very close to or hitting that 4 out of 5 mark Gate Ruler is in. Now, whether it's become a more enjoyable experience than Gate Ruler, I don't know. I'd have to get around to playing Gamma and get back to you on that. Tenshoku is an unlicensed garage game and Jeff is only charging you for the shipping. You are not buying the cards, he is giving them to you. I don't think the price is a concern given it's an expandable card game, and a playset of one set is, at the moment, 50 USD, or you can get both shipped to you for 91 USD. 50 USD is about how much an expandable card game core set costs, so it's a non-issue. You can try out beta on Untap via the custom card game section. I don't know if by the time you are watching this, whether Gamma is up or not. Truthfully, I'd skip beta unless you are a completionist or want to experience it. Just go straight to Gamma. Gamma still has cards that do too much. I still think the power level could and should be toned down to Grim era. But that's rooted in my desire for it to be its own thing, and it's not. It's still a forcible expansion, and from what I understand, is meant to take the place of New Valhalla 3 onwards. It needs these power levels to act as that expansion. Saying that, Gamma is nowhere near as rough around the edges as Beta, and looks to be a vastly superior experience. Not that Beta doesn't have things to offer, just that Gamma is a more complete package. Hopefully if Jeff continues Tenshoku with a Delta set, it continues improving in the way Gamma did. This has been Some Gamer Dude, and thanks for watching.